There was a building in your town that held everything you ever wanted in the world. You could see the sign from the highway, that backwards R glowing like a beacon, and the moment your parents turned into the parking lot, your whole body changed because you knew what was about to happen. You were about to walk through those automatic doors and stand inside a place that was built for no other purpose on earth than to make you believe that childhood should never end. 15 of those buildings stood in 35 countries. A quarter of every toy sold on this planet passed through their doors, and the man who built it all, a 25-year-old veteran who started with $5,000 in a baby furniture shop inside his father's bicycle repair store, died one day before they began selling off everything he ever created. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. You heard it before you saw it. You were sitting on the living room floor on a Saturday morning, eating cereal out of the box with cartoons flickering on the television, and then a commercial came on and you heard those first 3 notes and your whole body went still because you knew exactly what was coming. I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid. They got a million toys at Toys R Us that I can play with. You knew every single word of that song the way you knew your own address, and you sang it in the car on the way there, and you sang it in the bathtub that night, and you sang it walking across the parking lot with your mother's hand wrapped around yours while the automatic doors slid open and the cold air and the smell and the light hit you all at once, and nothing else on this entire planet existed anymore because you were inside. The smell hit you first. New plastic and cardboard and something rubbery and sweet that you could not name, but you would recognize 40 years later if someone put it under your nose. The floors were hard, the ceilings were high, the aisles stretched out in front of you like airport runways, and every single inch of every single shelf was stacked floor to ceiling with toys. Not some toys, not a toy section in a department store wedged between the socks and the kitchen appliances, all toys. Nothing but toys. An entire building the size of a supermarket filled with nothing but the only thing on earth that mattered to you. You grabbed a shopping cart even though you were not buying anything. It did not matter. You needed the cart because you needed to hold things. You needed to pick up the box and look at the picture on the front and flip it over and read the back and imagine yourself playing with it and then put it back and pick up the next one. That was the ritual. The aisle by aisle, shelf by shelf pilgrimage through everything you wanted and almost nothing you could have. And that was fine, because being inside Toys R Us was the thing. The having was secondary. The being there was everything. The action figure aisle, Star Wars, G.I. Joe, Transformers, He-Man, Ninja Turtles, every figure lined up on pegs in rows so deep you had to reach your arm in to grab the one in the back. The doll aisle, Barbie in every outfit ever designed. Cabbage Patch Kids that people literally fought over in December of 1983. The board game aisle where you could stare at a wall of Monopoly and Clue and Life and change your mind 11 times before your mom came to find you. And the video game section, that was the holy ground. Glass cases with the consoles behind locked doors. Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo. You would press your face against the glass and stare at the boxes and read every word on every label. Some stores had a demo station where you could actually play. You would wait in line for your turn, and when you finally got the controller in your hands, you played like your life depended on it, because your mom was going to come around the corner any second and say, "We are leaving." Then Christmas. Christmas at Toys R Us was a different country. The parking lot was full by 9 in the morning. People double parked and people circled for 20 minutes waiting for a spot. Inside, the aisles were shoulder to shoulder, carts crashing into each other. Parents with lists check things off, sweating, arguing about prices, grabbing the last Tickle Me Elmo or the last Furby, or the last Power Ranger, or the last whatever it was that year off the shelf before somebody else got to it. The checkout lines wrapped around the building and the registers never stopped beeping. Wrapping paper and gift bags piled up next to the exit. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, a 6-year-old stood in the Lego aisle completely still, holding a box, staring at it like it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. That was Toys R Us. Not a store, a temple. A place where children went to worship at the altar of everything they had ever wanted and everything they had ever been promised. Where the jingle was not a marketing strategy, it was a promise. I don't want to grow up. Nobody who walked through those doors ever did. Now, how it all started and how the biggest toy store on earth lost its way. Charles Lazarus was born in 1923 in Washington, D.C. His father, Frank, ran a shop that repaired and sold used bicycles. Nothing fancy, a small business in a working neighborhood. Charles grew up around tools and customers and the smell of bike grease and the sound of a cash register that opened with a lever. When the war came, he enlisted. He served as a cryptographer and he spent the war breaking codes while everyone around him talked about one thing: going home, getting married, having kids. When the war ended in 1945, Lazarus came home to a country that was about to have more babies than any country in the history of the modern world. He saw it coming before the census did. He said years later that everyone he talked to said they were going to go home, get married, have children, and live the American dream. He decided he would open a store in his father's bicycle shop, but instead of selling bikes, he would sell cribs, carriages, strollers, high chairs, everything for the baby. In April 1948, he opened Children's Bargain Town at his father's old shop on 18th Street in Washington, D.C. $5,000 from savings and a bank loan. Baby furniture for the flood of new families pouring into the suburbs. It worked. But Lazarus noticed something almost immediately. Customers who bought a crib did not come back for another crib. They did not need two, but they kept asking if he sold toys. A kid who got a toy truck in January wanted a different toy truck by March. Toys broke. Toys went out of fashion. Toys were the only product on earth that guaranteed a repeat customer every few months for the next 12 years. He later said that the toy business was kind of an accident. Customers did not buy another crib or another high chair as their family grew, but they did buy toys for each child. He started small with rattles, stuffed animals, and tricycles, and he added more every month. By 1952, he had opened a second location called the Baby Furniture and Toy Supermarket, but it was in 1957 that everything changed. He opened a store in Rockville, Maryland that sold nothing but toys. It was modeled after a supermarket with wide aisles, high shelves, and concrete floors. Massive selection. No display cases, no fancy interiors, just toys, thousands of them, stacked to the ceiling, more than any store anyone had ever seen. He needed a name. The original name was too long for the sign, so he shortened it to Toys R Us, and he flipped the R backwards, like a child wrote it. That little detail became one of the most recognizable logos in the history of American business. In 1966, Lazarus sold his 4 stores to a company called Interstate Department Stores for the capital to grow. He stayed on to run the chain. Interstate went bankrupt in the 1970s, but the Toys R Us division was the only part making money. After the reorganization, the company shed everything else and renamed itself Toys R Us Incorporated. Lazarus was chief executive officer. By 1978, they were on the New York Stock Exchange. By 1980, the LA Times called them one of the hottest stocks on Wall Street. Then Geoffrey showed up. He had started as Dr. Giraffe in old newspaper ads in the 1950s. By 1965, he had a real name, Geoffrey the Giraffe. By 1973, he was on television, tall and friendly and goofy and instantly recognizable to every kid in America. Geoffrey was the doorman to the best building on earth. If you saw Geoffrey, you were home. And then the jingle. In the early 1980s, a junior copywriter named Linda Kaplan Thaler and her creative director at the J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency wrote it together. That creative director was James Patterson. Yeah, that James Patterson. The man who would become the best-selling author in the world, with a net worth of $700 million, his thrillers stacked on every airport bookshelf from here to Tokyo. When he was 34 years old, his biggest hit was not a novel. It was 5 words. I am a Toys R Us kid. The company exploded. By 1983, sales passed $1 billion. International stores opened in Canada and Singapore, and then across France, Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Israel. By the mid-1990s, there were over 1,500 stores in 35 countries. Toys R Us had a quarter of the entire world's toy market. A quarter. No one had ever done that with toys, and no one has done it since. Lazarus ran it like a machine, computerized inventory before most retailers knew what that meant. Every product, every store, every sale tracked in real time. He spotted hot sellers weeks before anyone else and had them stocked before the competition even placed an order. In 2001, they opened the flagship in Times Square. It cost $35 million. A 60-foot Ferris wheel inside the store, a 2-story Barbie dollhouse, a 20-foot animatronic T-Rex that roared when you walked past it. Kids walked in, their jaws dropped, and they did not close again for an hour. But by then, the cracks were already there. Walmart had started selling toys at a loss in 1990, not because they wanted to make money on toys, because they wanted you in the building. Diapers at cost, Hot Wheels at cost, get the family through the door and sell them everything else while they are here. Target did the same thing. Suddenly, the hot Christmas toy was not something you drove across town to Toys R Us for. It was sitting in a bin at the Walmart you were already in. By 1998, Walmart had passed Toys R Us as the largest toy seller in America. Toys R Us still had 20% of the market. Still massive, but it was shrinking. And instead of fighting, the company made the worst deal in the history of e-commerce. In 2000, after a catastrophic holiday season, when online orders arrived late or not at all, Toys R Us signed a 10-year exclusive deal with Amazon. Amazon would be their online storefront. Amazon would handle fulfillment. Toys R Us would supply the toys. What actually happened was this: Amazon took all their customer data, learned everything about who buys toys, when they buy them, what they search for, and what they will pay. Then Amazon broke the exclusivity agreement by letting third-party sellers onto the platform anyway. Toys R Us sued and won $51 million in 2009, but the damage was done. They had spent nearly a decade without building their own online presence. They had handed the playbook to the company that would eventually help replace them. Then Wall Street showed up, and that's when the trouble really started. In 2005, 3 firms bought Toys R Us for $6.6 billion. The buyers were KKR, Bain Capital, and Vornado Realty Trust. It was a leveraged buyout. 80% of the purchase price was borrowed. The firms put up about $1.3 billion of their own money. The other $5 billion was debt, and they did not carry that debt themselves. They put it on Toys R Us. Overnight, a toy store for children owed $5 billion to banks. $400 million a year just in interest payments, not to build new stores, not to improve the website, not to hire more people or stock more shelves. $400 million a year to service debt that existed only because 3 investment firms wanted to buy a toy company with somebody else's money. Before the buyout, Toys R Us had $2.2 billion in cash. By 2017, that had shrunk to $301 million. The money went to interest payments and advisory fees. All told, the 3 firms collected $470 million in fees before the company went under. And here's the number that should make you stop and think. In 2017, the year Toys R Us filed for bankruptcy, the company still accounted for 1 out of every 5 toys sold in the United States, 20% of the entire market. The net loss that year was $36 million. Without the debt payments, the company was profitable. It did not fail because kids stopped wanting toys. It did not fail because Amazon was better. It failed because 3 firms on Wall Street decided that a toy store was a machine you could extract money from until there was nothing left. On September 18, 2017, Toys R Us filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It had $5 billion in debt. They borrowed $2 billion more to try to stock the shelves for Christmas. It did not work. Suppliers panicked and demanded cash up front, shelves went empty, and customers stayed home. The holiday season was a disaster. By March 2018, it was over. All 800 stores in the United States were closed. The company moved to liquidation. Everything must go. 33,000 people lost their jobs, many of them without severance. Charles Lazarus was 94 years old. He had spent 70 years building a company that made children's eyes light up. He had started with baby cribs in his father's bicycle shop and turned it into something that spanned 35 countries. He had not owned a share in years, but he had visited the headquarters in New Jersey just the year before. He still cared. He still loved the toys. He still lit up when he watched kids play. His successor called him the father of the toy business. He passed away peacefully on March 22, 2018 at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. He was 94. He never had to see the liquidation sales. They started the next morning. In June 2018, a Toys R Us employee named Renee Jean-Pierre took a photograph inside her store on its last night. The shelves were bare, the lights were still on, but the building was empty. Standing in the middle of the floor was Geoffrey the Giraffe, holding a small suitcase and waving goodbye. That photograph was shared 300,000 times on Facebook. People who had not thought about Toys R Us in years saw it and felt something stir inside them. One woman wrote that if Geoffrey the Giraffe with his little suitcase leaving the empty store does not bring a tear to your eye, then she cannot help you. But the story does not end there, because a man named Lazarus built this company, and Lazarus, in every story ever told, comes back. In 2021, a brand management firm called WHP Global bought the name, the logo, the giraffe, and everything that made it matter. They put Toys R Us inside every Macy's location in the country, more than 450 stores. They then started opening standalone flagship stores at the Mall of America and at the American Dream Mall in New Jersey. Then 10 more, then 20 seasonal pop-ups, then locations on military bases, then airports. As of now, there are more than 1,600 Toys R Us locations in 35 countries. The Ferris wheel is gone. The warehouse aisles are gone. The old stores with the concrete floors and the ceiling-high shelves are gone. But the name is on the door. Geoffrey is on the sign. And kids are walking through the entrance and looking up the way you did the first time your mom, your dad, or your grandmother took you there, and you realized you were standing inside a building that contained everything you had ever wanted. It's not the same. Everybody knows it's not the same. But it's there, and for a company that was worth $6.6 billion and got buried under $5 billion in debt by 3 firms that never cared about a single child who ever walked through those doors, the fact that Geoffrey is still standing is something close to a miracle. Your grandkids can walk in there this Christmas. They can hold a box. They can look at the picture on the front. They can flip it over and read the back. They can imagine. And when they look up at the sign with the backwards R, they'll feel something. They won't know why, but you will, because you felt it too 40 years ago in an aisle somewhere holding a box you knew your mom was going to say no to, and being happier than you'd ever been in your life. If you ever begged your parents to take you there and they said maybe, and you knew maybe meant yes. If you ever pushed a cart down an aisle, you had no business being in just to see what was there. If you ever pressed your face against the glass of the video game case and dreamed. If you ever heard those first 3 notes of the jingle and dropped everything you were doing. If you ever stood in a checkout line the week before Christmas holding a box that you knew was going to make somebody's face light up. You were a Toys R Us kid, and part of you still is. Geoffrey packed his suitcase, but he came back, and the backwards R is still on the door, and somewhere right now, a kid is walking in for the first time, and that's the only ending this story was ever supposed to have. If Toys R Us was part of your childhood, or your children's childhood, or your grandchildren's Christmas morning, tell me about it in the comments. What was your toy? What was the one you begged for? I want to hear it. If this was worth your time, subscribe. There are more of these stories coming. I don't want to grow up. And thanks to Geoffrey, maybe we don't have to.